At a train station, an employee named Joe is seen stepping out of one of the trains that has just arrived at the station, where Joe has just finished his work and intends to go home. As soon as he opens his locker, Joe finds out that his application for a promotion has been rejected. To make matters worse, the person who just got promoted now appears in front of Joe, asking him to continue working. That is, asking Joe to work overtime to cover for a train guard who has fallen ill. Joe, who had just finished his shift, complained for a moment, but since the order came directly from his superior, there was nothing Joe could do.
Platform 9.
After boarding the train, Joe began greeting all the passengers and announcing several stops before the train would eventually arrive at its destination in the city of Eastburn. From there, Joe started checking the passengers' tickets until he came across a female passenger named Kate, who happened to have lost her ticket. Since she couldn't find her ticket anywhere, Kate was ultimately forced to pay again with cash. After finishing with the woman, Joe continued his inspection. There were no significant problems, although a few passengers displayed unfriendly and rather annoying behavior. From there, Joe then met his crush, Salin, who happened to be handing out snacks and food to the passengers.
Hiya. I can this month. Sorry about your promotion.
In the middle of their conversation, Joe, not wanting to miss his chance, tried to ask Ellen out for drinks after work. Unfortunately, Ellen turned down his invitation, saying that there probably wouldn't be any bars or restaurants still open at that hour. On top of that, Ellen would have to go back to work again the next morning. After being politely rejected, a slightly disappointed Joe left and went to rest in his room. A few hours passed since then. Joe, who happened to be asleep, was suddenly startled by a loud noise that caused the train to stop in the middle of the tracks. Joe then tried to find out what had caused it. The conductor's voice was then heard announcing that the train had suffered a malfunction and they were forced to stop. While waiting for the conductor to fix the problem, Joe decided to check on the condition of the passengers. It turned out that almost all the passengers in the back were visibly panicked, and Joe even had a hard time trying to calm some of them down.
Calm down.
You just need to try and calm down. I'm right.
What do you think?
Right down there, sir.
Meanwhile, outside, the train engineer conducting an inspection discovered that their train had hit a wild deer, causing the animal to become stuck in one of the wheels. Then, just as the engineer was about to remove the animal, he suddenly heard a sound coming from behind the bushes. Inside the carriage, Joe, who was walking through, found and scolded a female passenger named Nina, who appeared to be smoking. Since she ignored him, Joe then took the cigarette and put it out right in front of the woman. After dealing with that, Joe, realizing they hadn't heard from the engineer, started to worry and thought about checking if the engineer was okay. Using a flashlight, Joe looked outside the carriage while continuously calling for the engineer, but since he couldn't find him, Joe and Ellen then started to worry quite a bit, so they ultimately decided to ask the local authorities for help. However, because of the severe bad weather conditions, the authorities regretfully said they would arrive in about 4 long hours. The news that help would only arrive in 4 hours made the passengers angry. Joe even added that the engineer had also mysteriously disappeared.
Oh my God.
Where's he gone?
I don't know.
The driver is missing?
Just calm down.
In the midst of the debate, a businessman named Adrian suddenly spoke up in a loud voice, causing everyone to fall silent for a moment. Adrian suggested that everyone get out and walk to the next station. Hearing this idea, most of the passengers actually agreed and began to prepare to leave. However, since the train doors could only be opened with a key held by Joe, the passengers had no choice but to beg Joe to open the doors for them. Well, even though opening the doors was against safety procedures, Joe eventually agreed to open them and also decided to accompany everyone. While walking through the forest, they heard a strange sound coming from behind the bushes. Curious, Joe and Ellen decided to check the source of the sound, but as they were searching the area, they were startled by the sight of the body of the train engineer, who had been brutally torn apart. Sensing that there was something dangerous in the forest, Joe and Ellen ran and urged the passengers to immediately return to the train. With great difficulty, most of the passengers finally managed to get back onto the train. But something terrible happened when an elderly woman, who arrived late with her husband, was attacked by something. In this uncertain situation, Joe and Elin then tried to give first aid to the grandmother who had suffered a rather severe wound on her leg. Then, the creature outside banged on the door, causing everyone to fall silent. From inside, they also heard scratching sounds as if something was clawing at the train, followed by a howling noise that gradually faded away. Here, Joe concluded that it seemed the creature outside had now left. Knowing this, the passengers felt a bit more at ease, even though they were aware that danger could appear at any moment. Not wanting anything bad to happen, Joe then tried to call for help from the authorities using the radio. But unfortunately, their radio signal suddenly disappeared. Next, not long after, a passenger named Billy came to help. From his inspection, Billy concluded that there was engine damage and a fuel leak that had occurred when their train stopped earlier. From there, Joe then explained the situation to the passengers. In the middle of the conversation, the elderly woman who was previously attacked explained that the creature outside wasn't an animal, but rather resembled a human. What the elderly woman said naturally made everyone doubt her testimony. But before they could argue for long, a suspicious noise was suddenly heard from inside the carriage. Joe, Billy, and Adrian then went to check it out, but when they reached the source of the noise, it turned out to be just a sound coming from a passenger named Paul, who was trapped inside the toilet. A few moments later, the old woman started to feel an excruciating pain as her wound was now getting much worse. To calm things down, Kate approached Nina, who looked worried about her mother. But in the middle of their warm conversation, they were startled by a loud noise coming from one of the doors. Something unexpected then happened when Nina managed to get a signal. Her phone started ringing and everyone began demanding she share information about the incident. But Adrian's impatience in trying to get Nina's phone ended up making her a target for the creature outside.
Out of my way. Give me that thing.
Witnessing that horrifying incident, Joe and Ellen then moved the passengers to another carriage. From there, some people began to scream and even started blaming each other. Amidst this situation, the old man then spoke out loudly, saying that if they wanted to survive, they all had to stop arguing about unimportant things, because in his opinion, it would be better for them to build defenses using the various equipment available on the train.
Easy, is it?
Then, after closing off all entry points, the passengers finally began to calm down. Meanwhile, Adrian, who was chatting with Joe, showed off his keys, which included a luxury apartment key, a house key, a car key, and so on. Adrian deliberately showed these in an attempt to influence Joe, hoping that if the creature eventually broke in, Joe would agree to open the door just for the two of them and then close it again, so that the others inside would be left to be devoured, buying time for the two of them to escape. Before Joe could respond, the old lady suddenly vomited a large amount of blood from her mouth. The situation worsened when Joe then realized that Paul had disappeared. Upon checking, Joe found out that Paul was actually using the toilet. Knowing this, Joe then told Paul to come out immediately and return to their carriage. Unfortunately, the toilet door suddenly broke, followed by a loud noise coming from the top of the train. Knowing that Paul was already dead, Joe then tried to return, but when he was about to enter the previous carriage, he found the door had been closed by Adrian. In fact, Adrian even thought of taking advantage of the situation to escape. Fortunately, Joe was still able to be saved just moments before the creature caught him. Not long after, the creature managed to break through the door, causing everyone to finally see the form of the creature that was hunting them. Joe, along with all the other men, quickly attacked the terrifying creature using whatever objects they could find. The creature fought back for a moment by strangling Billy, but a young man named Matthew grabbed an axe and then... After successfully defeating the creature, Matthew concluded that the being before them was a werewolf. Its form was indeed unlike the werewolves of legend, but according to Matthew, this creature more closely resembled a hybrid between a human and a wolf, because its face still looked somewhat human. What was even more surprising was a ring attached to its hand, indicating that this creature was once a human who had mutated. Upon learning this information, all the passengers began to grow suspicious of the old woman who had previously been bitten. But before getting to that, the old man who was with the other passengers then recounted a tragedy that happened in 1953. At that time, a train suddenly derailed at the very same location. The rescue team that arrived at the scene found the passengers had died in a gruesome state. The old man had never believed that story, but he only started to believe it after experiencing the event himself now. Then, in the middle of this conversation, the werewolf who had previously died suddenly came back to life. After making sure that the creature was dead for the second time, a group of werewolves was now seen gathering in the forest, where they were spying and planning to launch an attack. Inside the train, the grandmother's body slowly began to mutate. Adrian, realizing this, then intended to kill her. Tension arose as the grandfather and everyone else tried to stop Adrian's actions, but fortunately, Joe quickly arrived and knocked Adrian out until he passed out. Then, to prevent any unwanted incidents, Joe asked the passengers to tie up both Adrian and the grandmother. Here, Joe intends to repair the train, and he will be assisted by Billy, who is a mechanical engineering student, along with Ellen and Matthew. Joe and Ellen will stay in the control room while waiting for the indicator light to come back on. Meanwhile, Billy and Matthew have to go outside to fix the damage. Fortunately, they managed to find the source of the fuel leak, and from there Billy crawled underneath and started fixing it. However, while Matthew was standing guard, he accidentally heard the voice of someone calling for help. Curious, Matthew then went into the forest to check it out, and after investigating, he found that the source of the voice was Nina, who was now being attacked by one of the werewolves. Meanwhile, Billy, who managed to fix the damage, realized that he was in danger. Unable to go anywhere, Billy then decided to hide by hanging onto something. Unfortunately, Joe and Ellen, who were shocked when they saw the werewolf, immediately started the train without realizing that Billy was hanging underneath the carriage. In the increasingly chaotic situation, with the grandmother now almost fully transformed and knowing she was about to attack her husband, Kate took the opportunity to untie Adrian. However, once freed, Adrian did not return Kate's kindness. Instead, he deliberately pushed her down when they saw a creature opening the train door. Meanwhile, Billy, who kept struggling to avoid a pointless death, accidentally pulled the fuel hose, which caused the train to leak and forced it to stop once again. Joe, feeling disappointed, went back to check on the passengers. Fortunately, Joe arrived just in time as the old lady was about to finish off Adrian. Realizing that they were the only ones left, the three of them closed off all the entrances and held out as best they could against the werewolves that were starting to approach them. Here, Joe planned to escape when the creatures reached their carriage. However, Adrian, who only wanted to escape by himself, then attacked Joe to seize the door key. Adrian intended to escape alone and use Joe and Ellen as bait for the werewolves. Then, in the midst of a desperate situation, Billy suddenly appeared carrying a Molotov cocktail. Slowly, Billy pushed back the three creatures that were in their train car. But unfortunately, as soon as Joe Brass opened the door, Billy didn't have time to escape, and as a result, he became a victim of the werewolf's ferocity. Joe and Ellen ran into the forest with all their might. They kept running, their hearts pounding, until Joe suddenly realized with a jolt that they were completely surrounded. To ensure Ellen's safety, Joe unexpectedly decided to stay behind to give Ellen a chance to escape. Before bravely facing the formidable beast, Joe tenderly kissed Ellen one last, lingering time. Ellen could only cry as Joe told her to run as far as she could, while constantly wondering what Joe's fate would be. In the final scene, it is revealed that Ellen eventually manages to reach the station, her body covered in blood. Meanwhile, Adrian, who had previously gone off alone, now finds himself lost in the forest. But as they say, karma really can't be avoided, because when Adrian arrives at a certain location, he encounters Joe, who has now transformed into a werewolf. That was the plot summary of the film Howl, which was released in 2015. I guess some of you have probably already watched this movie, right? It's a horror film that really leaves a terrifying impression when you watch it for the first time. So, that's it for our story this time. Thank you to everyone who watched, and see you again next time. You guys are awesome. Oh,